Perfect. Today is a special opportunity to speak about learning languages, especially mastering a language in 6 months. We're going to discuss that with Chris. Chris, could you please introduce yourself and what do you do for business?
Okay, my name is Chris Lonsdale. For many years, I was running a consulting business where I was advising senior leaders and senior teams on corporate strategy, communication, doing a lot of work individually as well, helping senior people through the dark night of the soul. So issues around their communication, how they manage their emotions, how they managed even their thinking. So did that for probably 30 years, I think. And a number of years ago, I got so tired of people asking the question about language learning. Oh, languages are hard and it's not possible, and Chinese takes you 20 years and you're never any good. So I wrote a book called The Third Ear. You can learn any language, and from that we went into ultimately creating a product in China called Kung Fu English, which is for Chinese-speaking people to learn English. So that's basically available to Chinese speakers around the world. It's a program that runs on an iOS device, so Apple, iPhone, iPod Touch, and it's enough. If you're a complete beginner, you can actually get to fluency using that system. Depending on how many hours a day you spend, it could be a few months out to a couple of years. So these days I spend most of my time working on projects related to that.
So let's come to the basic question. Like your claim is that we can learn a language in 6 months. Well, what is the science behind that? How does that work?
Okay, it's a really interesting question. I many years ago began to get involved in accelerated learning methodologies and delved very, very deeply into super learning, which you may have heard, which is the use of music and learning and stuff. And the actual seed for that was from Bulgaria. There was a psychologist in Bulgaria by the name of Georgi Lazanov. And he, along with a woman called Eva Gateva, had developed a language program that they called Suggestopedia, and they were able to teach Bulgarian soldiers to speak Italian in 3 weeks. So yeah, so I got into his writing. I bought all of his books. I spent many weeks really digging very, very deep into his work and internalized the key ideas. And they were subtle. There was some ideas in there that were very, very subtle, but based on his writing, I developed a high-speed course for English speakers to learn Mandarin. And we set up a 2-week course. We ran in Hong Kong, and then I did it again in China for foreigners. And people who had no Chinese in 2 weeks were able to get around the city and communicate, buy things, deal with directions, everything else. So it was very clear that you can get a lot of progress in a very, very short period of time by using the right ways of approaching it. It was just really, really hard work for the facilitator to run those programs. Brutal. The amount of preparation is just enormous, and then the requirements for your state to be correct when you're leading those programs is very, very high. So that was one challenge. The other challenge is most people can't afford 2 or 3 weeks away from work to go and do an intensive course in language. And thirdly, yeah, if 6 months sounds incredible, 2 to 3 weeks to learn a language, most people just will dismiss it as crazy talk. So it's not something that you can actually turn into a business, even though it actually does work. It's a very, very high bar to do as a business. So I decided after that experience to write my book, The Third Ear, and people from around the world got that book. So there was an Australian guy who got the book, who read it, who took himself to China, to Qingdao, and in 6 months from nothing, he was fluent in Mandarin. By 9 months, he was reading and writing at a very, very high level. A woman from India bought the book, took herself down to Chile. Again, zero Spanish, and in 6 months, her Spanish was good enough for her to be hired as a sales manager in a multinational company, which required bilingual skills. Woman from Australia was in Holland, couldn't learn Dutch, read the book, took herself to Brazil, and in 6 months, her Portuguese was at the level that she could get a job as the head of diversity in a major multinational corporation. So there were so many people using that book, The Third Ear, and getting to fluency in 6 months, that it was really obvious that if you use the right approach and you have access to the language in the right way, you're going to be competent to fluent in 6 months. So that's where that comes from.
So my question here is, like, what principles do you depend on?
The principle that everybody on planet Earth is a genius at learning language, and we know this because you've learned at least one from zero by yourself.
Yeah, that is right. So could you
Right?
explain? Yeah, that is correctly a fact. Like, how does it work? How do you turn this into a program?
With a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, lot of investment. The basic thing, first of all, is you need to understand that if you're going to master a language quickly, you need to treat yourself as a child. So you don't start with writing. You don't try and remember lists of words. You don't try and analyze grammar. First of all, you need to just listen a lot without caring what it means. It's a process that I call brain soaking. So in my TEDx talk, How to Learn Any Language in 6 months, I've talked about this. But what happens is when you're listening a lot, there's filters in your brain that get tuned to the new language. And before you're tuned to the new language, you literally cannot hear the sounds. So if you can't hear the sounds, you can't replicate the sounds. So the first thing you have to do is just listen in volume. And then you start to hear the sounds. You start to hear patterns that repeat. Then you need to begin to get your body involved. So if you're little kids, right, when they're learning a language, the first thing that happens is they won't be talking, but they will be responding to commands. So the father will say, come here, sit down. A little kid goes across and sits down. Mother says, open your mouth. Kid opens his mouth. So there's a process that we go through with our first language where we're connecting what we're hearing to physical responses in our body. And that's actually an important piece. If you don't have that, then you tend to be translating. And if you're translating, then you're never really connecting with what are known as internal representations. Your visual, kinesthetic, olfactory, taste, sense, spatial sense. There are all these senses that we have in our body, and we understand the world through all of these senses. And when we add language, we're actually using sounds to label these internal representations. So you have to go through a process where you drop your mother tongue and you literally go back to being a child, where you're connecting sounds to your internal representations. You're pointing at things, you're going, huh? How do you say that? What's that? And then you're labeling those things, you're touching them, smelling them, tasting them, whatever it takes. So when you're doing those two things, you've already solved most of the problems. And then after that, you need to some extent, not force yourself, but you need to encourage yourself as soon as possible to be using short phrases, single words, 2-3 words to make things happen. So give me, who, you, okay, what, that. So your grammar is not going to be perfect, but you're using the language to get an effect in your environment. And that's what language is for. So if you just keep those things in mind, then very, very quickly, you're going to be using the language.
That is more than awesome. So my other question is about our abilities and our skills. Like, are some people more talented at learning languages more than others?
Yeah, but you need to, in order to make that assessment, You need to look at that person as a child, how they were with language. So how good someone is with their mother tongue will predict how well they do with the second language.
So let me rephrase the question here. Like, do some people have the right to complain about the difficulty of learning languages?
People have the right to complain about anything they like. Whether or not that's going to help them achieve their outcome is an interesting question. Most people have difficulty learning language because they do it the wrong way. So
Okay.
I tried learning. Okay, when I was at school, I was bottom of the class doing French. Okay, but I speak Mandarin Chinese to a native level. I'm published in Chinese. I've written a book in Chinese. It's a bestseller. So my Chinese is better now than many Chinese people. All right. So here's someone who was doing terrible at language in school who can achieve that sort of outcome. Now, in the middle of that, I had the chance as a 17-year-old, I think, to have a student from Tahiti, which is a French-speaking colony in the Pacific, to come to my house for 2 months as an exchange student. And he was lazy, so we spoke French. And then I got to go to his house and live in his house for 6 weeks, where it was all French. In that period of time, I got enough French to not do another piece of work on my French for 2 years and got top grades in school, and I got second place in a national French competition. So very clearly, the method that you use to learn a language dictates your outcome.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so for instance, one of the people who uses our Kung Fu English course, she was a doctor, she's a mother, she has been learning English for 4 years, almost full time, zero progress. She gets our Kung Fu English course, and in 4 weeks she's talking, and now she's talking English at home with her 4-year-old son, and she sounds almost native. So it's really night and day. If you do it wrong, you're going to suffer, you're going to fail. If you do it right, which means reactivating what you already know how to do because you did it as a child, then a new language is actually not going to be that much of a problem.
Let's relate this to age. Like, does age affect our learning ability?
If you're asking the question, do kids learn foreign language faster than adults? The evidence is no, because research that has been done where the children and the adults' time of exposure to the language was equal, the adults learned faster.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and that's because of something I call the adult advantage. Children are not just learning language, they're learning how to communicate, they're learning new concepts. There's so much information. Adults have a lot of that already. So for the adult, they're learning the sounds of the language and they're learning a new set of labels. The thing with adults is they have to get out of their own way. Adults try to be perfect, speak at a very high level of literacy immediately. And that, you know, it's trying to jump to the moon in one jump. You cannot do that. It's that expectation that blocks them. It's the fact they're trying to study grammar, which doesn't work, that blocks them. Also, adults tend to be trying to learn a language when they're tired at the end of a work week. They go into classes, they miss 3 classes, they can't keep up. There's all sorts of issues around an adult learning a language that are not related to the adult's ability to learn the language. They're related to time management, stress, a whole bunch of other issues.
Let's widen the question here. Like, can a period of 6 months work for like different types of languages, or is it like
it's
English?
It's the same. It's the same because, so for instance, the people who use the third ear, they were learning Portuguese, Spanish, Mandarin Chinese. So all English speakers learning these various different languages, and the time period was about the same for all of them. So it really doesn't matter. because you're going back to the fundamental human neurology, which is capable of doing this, and you're activating that capability again. So you're starting from zero, and you're treating yourself as starting from zero. If the new language you're learning is very close to what you already speak. So for instance, if you speak, say you speak Spanish and then you go and learn Italian, it's going to be very, very, very fast. It can be a month to 2 months, right? If you're an English speaker and you try and speak Arabic, it's going to be probably 6 months, because the sounds are all different. The way you use your throat and your face and everything is all different. The way the language is structured is different. So there are a lot of differences. So you really need to treat it as a zero. You've just been born, and you're now an Arabic baby, and you have to learn Arabic. But if you do that, if you set your mindset like that, then you're going to succeed.
Let's speak about the mind here. Like, what kind of mindset, commitment, consistency would you require on these programs?
Well, ideally, you have to do it every day. Number one, you have to do it, and you have to, as quickly as possible, you need to find ways to be using it as a tool. So it's not an academic exercise. You have to switch from, this is a subject that I'm learning, to this is a tool that I'm mastering, and therefore you need to be using the tool. So that's absolutely key. What else? You need to be gentle with yourself.
What do you mean by that?
Well, adults tend to beat themselves up if they're not perfect immediately. Right? So you have to go, I'm close. I got the response I wanted, even though they looked at me funny. All right. I'm getting some words, but other words I just can't get yet. And that's normal, right? The words, in terms of their sounds that are close to what you already speak in your mother tongue, you'll get quickly. Then there are other sounds that are like miles away. So you need several weeks of listening for your brain to hear them clearly. And then you need several weeks of practice in order for your mouth to be able to deliver on the sounds. And then you need a few more weeks for it to be able to do it smoothly across sounds as you're making new words together in a sentence. And so during that process, you're not going to be perfect. So it's this acceptance of the process. The other thing you need to do is to learn to observe where you're improving. Because a lot of people make a serious mistake. They're always focusing on, that was wrong, that was wrong, that was wrong. Yeah, but you got 90% right. You've gone from 0 to 90%, and you're missing 10%. So why are you focusing on the 10%? The only thing you need to do with that 10% is a small reminder. I focus on this a little bit more, but you shouldn't be beating yourself up because you're not perfect yet. But people, adults especially, tend to beat themselves up, not perfect. And then what happens? They lose motivation. Their brain says, okay, I've done so much for you already, and you're blaming me for the last bit we haven't got yet. Okay, I'm not going to support you anymore. So your brain literally turns off. So your learning comes off. You stop learning. You're trying, you're working hard, you're burning the midnight oil, and your brain is saying, nah, I'm not going to support you on this because you're not encouraging me, you're not trusting me.
That is really awesome to know. So my question here, like, did you take this further?
When you say further, in what sense?
I mean, like, you have this approach for learning the languages, and you have set these programs. Like, how did you take this forward?
Okay. Well, we looked at the situation in China, and almost everybody, China, everybody pretty much learns English at school, and China is not a bilingual country. Most people cannot speak English, even if their life depended on it. So here's a massive problem that needs a solution. You're never going to be able to have enough foreigners teaching for people to learn, and teaching is in fact the wrong way. So we went to basic principles. As a learner, you need to be spending hours a day listening for a start, and then you need to be mapping what you're hearing to things you see around you. You need to be connecting with with those internal representations. As I said in my TEDx talk, you need to be able to see the face when someone's talking. So, for instance, imagine someone's talking to you in a shop, and you go, "Can I look at your face?" It sort of doesn't work that way. So you need a way to be able to do all those things on your own time, not bothering other people. So that was our starting point. I'd also had all that experience with using music as part of the learning process from Lazanov's work. So we decided to put all of that together into a mobile iPod Touch, so that people can, because the other thing in China was a lot of downtime. You're on the train for an hour, you're waiting for a meeting for 20 minutes. There's all this downtime. What do? You can just put on your headphones and spend 20 minutes practicing your English. So that was the basic idea. So when the first iPhone came out and the App Store was just getting started, we decided to create the system that would be available on the iOS to provide a way for people to learn. So when you're learning, 80% of the time is input, and then the last 20% is output. And so you need to have a lot of input, you need to have a lot of foundation, and then you can start outputting. So the other part of what we offer is live language parents, who will basically be like a parent, who will understand what the learner is trying to say, even if it's not perfect, the grammar's not right, the pronunciation is off, but they will understand it, and then they will clarify meaning. So you mean this, you mean you're very tired today. So the person might say, "Me tired today." And so the coach will go, "You mean you're tired today?" Yes, I'm tired today. So they're getting feedback without being corrected. So our language parents work that way. So the last 20% is real humans talking with people and just communicating with them. So they're, again, using it as a tool to communicate. They're not trying to learn it as a subject, and they're doing the bulk of the work themselves. So we built what we call language to body. So you hear a phrase, "walk to the door," and you've got a number of images, and you pick the image which represents walk to the door, but we encourage people to actually physically walk to the door. Okay, open the door with your left hand. So they reach out, they open the door with their left hand. Okay, close the door, turn around, sit down on the floor. So they'll close the door, turn around, sit down on the floor. So they're going through that process that the child goes through, hearing commands and obeying those commands in the body. And then checking that they're right by picking the correct line drawings. So we have the music, we have that, we have a lot of looping in the system. So you've met some words, and then you start hearing sounds, and you get to pick pictures to confirm your learning and reinforce your learning. So it's built in a very integrated way, in a spiral where you're meeting the same content in different contexts and adding new content to it piece by piece. You're practicing your pronunciation, you're listening to your own pronunciation, you're connecting to your visual system, to your body feelings, all sorts of stuff. So we try to use a full multi-sensory approach in micro lessons. So no lesson is more than a few minutes. So you can use little snips of time during the day. So that's sort of pretty much how we took the theoretical ideas and put them into a system that people can use on their own, make massive progress, and then they talk to language parents to take that forward.
That is perfect. So nowadays, like, we see more of artificial intelligence and the technology. Like, how is language learning working in the future? Is it still important, or can it be replaced?
Yeah, right. Well, if language learning is replaced with AI, then when you find a lady from another culture who doesn't speak your language, you're definitely going to take the AI with you to bed, right?
Certainly.
Yeah. So I don't think, although AI could be used absolutely everywhere, I don't think we want AI that close to us for everything that we do, and we actually want to have real interaction with other people. The other thing about language is it's 85% nonverbal.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not the words per se, it can be the intonation, it can be the look on the face when someone's saying something. So proper human communication actually is 85% nonverbal. So the AI can handle potentially the verbal part, but it's a long way away from being able to understand the nonverbals and the nuance. And of course, once you start getting into metaphors and everything else, I'm not saying that AI won't be able to get there, but it's going to be a long time. And using language to communicate, until we can use telepathy, of course, is a joy for humans. We enjoy the process of using language to express ourselves. And different languages have different approaches to communicate meaning, and there are meanings in one language that literally cannot exist in the other language. It could be just a couple of words, but you might need a paragraph or a page in the other language to actually describe what is being talked about. So AI can't do that. AI can't do that. So on the other hand, there is technology. If you look at the way language and AI is being done right now, it's mostly using statistical analysis of co-location of words and everything else. That model, they're spending billions on it, and they still can't move the needle in terms of the machines actually being human. Nowhere near human. And people providing chatbots and everything else and language processing around chatbots, they either have the uncanny valley where it's just weird, you're talking to a machine, or very often a particular very human way of saying something just falls over, it just fails in the AI because the word order is flipped and something. Now, there's new technology coming out where the systems use meaning to understand the language rather than syntax and grammar. And those systems actually are going to take it to a whole new level. So for instance, for learning a language, we can take that sort of a system and we can build it into our current program. So for early stage, our learners can have an interaction with their device as if it's a real person.
Okay, yeah,
Okay,
that is more than awesome.
Yeah, so that's the way to solve that problem. So at a certain stage, you want to get to real humans, but right at the beginning, I'm nervous. I feel embarrassed. I talk to my phone, and my phone answers me. That's okay.
Yeah, that at least removes a part of the embarrassment. So my other question here is like, how can everyone benefit from your principles to their own learning style?
All right, to their own learning style. Well, their own learning style as a child already includes all of the principles I've talked about, because they learned their first language already. And what we're doing is we're taking the learning style of babies in any language to learn their mother tongue. So what I'm talking about is literally just making those ideas available to people, right? Babies brain soak. They hear their parents talking all day and they don't understand a word, but their brain is processing it. Babies follow commands. And then they look at the face, the mother's face, and they try and replicate the sounds. And then they start with simple things, saying, give you, and they mean give me. Right? So they get the grammar wrong, but through the body language and everything else, it's very clear what they're saying. So everybody has gone through this process growing up. And all I'm saying is you need to do it again. You need to go through the process again in order to get the new language. And because you're an adult, there are a few things we can shortcut by giving you some tips and hints and giving you a little bit of structure. Now, if you're more visual, then you can use visual a lot more. If you're more in the body, you can pay a lot more attention to what's going on kinesthetically. Everybody has to learn to listen. Yeah, I have people say, "Oh, but I'm a visual learner, and if I don't see the words, then I can't remember them." Here's the thing: if you can't hear the words, then you're not going to speak the language. You have to hear it. You have to hear it in lots of times, a lot of hours. And now, if you're a visual person, then you'll be very good at hearing the sound and connecting it to an image. So you hear 见到, and you know that's 见到, right? You hear 眼镜, and you see this. So you connect that sound 眼镜 to this. So you can use your visual as part of the learning. The problem is the way languages are taught. It's all written text to written text with very little auditory mostly and no imagery. And so basically most people are disadvantaged because most people are actually quite auditory and quite visual and not so good with text.
That is really right. Okay, it has been more than awesome and more than amazing talking to you, Chris, today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. It's been great talking to you and great questions.